Chapter 34. Instruments of Destruction. Marcus waited patiently for the group of riders to come to a halt at the base of the dune, some 30 yards below him. He observed their arrival through squinted eyes that were weighed down by a set of heavy bags, and did not like what he was seeing at all. Even as they were approaching from afar, it became obvious he wasn't about to deal with a bunch of merchants or a travelling troupe. Within an hour, he was met with 6 riders on horseback. All of them wore featureless white robes with large hoods that concealed their identities. The rider in front had a big, ashy beard and carried a glaive that was made from a strange sort of black steel on his back. The man brought the other riders to a halt with a closed fist next to his head. Marcus glared at the party as the cloud of dust settled down, and somehow found it humorous that their horses were anxiously skittering back and forth at the sight of him. He scoffed and snarled at them, baring a set of teeth that were still bloodied from his previous prey. The horses seemed wise enough to take that as a warning and kept a safe distance, but their masters weren't intimidated by the hostile display at all. Marcus lowered his eyes to their captives, who lay motionless on the sand carpet, each one individually bound to a horse with long metal chains. They had been dragged along the rough surface of the Doran and appeared to be more dead than alive. A sudden jolt of electricity darted across his chest when he noticed the emblem on their coats, a ram's head wearing an 8-pointed crown placed inside a green octagon with golden outlines. It was a symbol that all Malaki soldiers wore on their uniforms, the crest of the Baratok clan, Malakai's royal family. Luckily, he could still hear the faint rhythms of their hearts, even though he was sure that not all of them would make it to the end of the day. Nevertheless, he saw no other choice but to negotiate for their release. He needed help getting to Rokan, and freeing the Marlaks might just be the perfect way to introduce himself to King Ifra. If nothing else, it could still serve as an apology for his delay. He drew a deep breath and immediately widened his eyes in shock. One of the captives carried a scent he still remembered from his days at the academy. It unnerved him that the riders even managed to neutralize a graduate of Ethelwomb like Taimujin Sivalok. It meant that they were no ordinary thugs, and he would be wise not to underestimate them, especially in his current condition. The rider who carried a glaive on his back raised his chin and shaded his eyes with both hands.
"You seem to have fallen on hard times, stranger. Are you perchance lost?"
The man spoke in a calm fashion with a deep and husky voice. He was smiling and seemed to find joy in this serendipitous encounter. That didn't sit well with Marcus. The answer to the question should have been obvious at first sight. He was heavily sunburned, hadn't washed himself in weeks, and carried an intensity in his eyes that would make the look of a deranged madman seem serene. His beard, which was usually neatly trimmed, had grown and spread out like ivy over an abandoned ruin. He was severely dehydrated and wore all the telltale signs on his sunken face.
"Where are you headed, friend?"
Another rider asked when Marcus didn't respond to her companion's question. He slowly turned his eyes to the woman, but only found himself staring at the lower half of her face. The skin he saw was smooth and pale, like a sculpture made from alabaster. A deep and intense red coloured the lips that were curled up to a wicked smile. He recognized that demeanor. It was the look of a predator, salivating over an easy kill. He chuckled, but at the same time mentally prepared himself for a potentially violent confrontation.
"I wasn't aware I was amongst friends,"
he said, feigning a smile that only amplified his unhinged demeanor.
"From what I've been led to believe, friends know each other's names."
Well, if that is all it takes to become your friend, we would be very rude not to introduce ourselves.
The man with the glaive removed his hood with a grin that was halfway hidden behind his big, woolly beard.
"Esau,"
he said, and combed a hand through his waxy grey hair. Marcus squinted in suspicion. Judging from the foggy, glintless eyes he saw, it would appear that Esau was blind. And yet, he was the rider who rode in front of the pack to lead the way. That most likely meant that Esau was either able to rely on senses other than his sight for navigation, just as Marcus himself was able to do, or he could perceive the world by interpreting the flow of aura, similar to Master Cyrus. Either option was enough to justify his apprehension.
Elandra.
The woman with the alabaster skin said while removing her hood to reveal an exceptional beauty that was hidden underneath. Her long black hair danced in the wind until it fell down to her chest in a wavy flow. She carried a playful twinkle in her golden cat-like eyes that would make anyone look up twice. And if Marcus wasn't so terribly immune to flirtation, he would have noticed the signals Elandra was sending him.
Ilio,
The next rider said. He removed his hood to show Marcus a glimpse of his unruly tangerine-coloured hair, but then quickly pulled it back up to cover his youthful, freckled face from the harsh sunlight. He carried a scimitar on his right side that seemed to be in perfect, unused condition. Not much else could be said about Ilio, but one thing that did jump out was that all his fingernails were painted black.
Ivandor,
A bald-headed man with a worn-out, chiseled face said. His voice sounded just as tired as he looked. He impatiently tapped his bandaged fingers on the pommel of a long, slender sword that was dangling from his belt. The gesture reminded Marcus of Preceptor Minari, who had once been his favourite teacher at the academy, but now only brought along painful memories at the mere suggestion of her existence. Ivandor paused momentarily to let out a yawn, but then continued tapping his sword in an irregular rhythm.
Valise.
A petite young girl with long silver hair said. Judging from her appearance, she couldn't have been much older than 15 or 16. Apart from her age, Marcus couldn't quite figure out what it was that separated Valise from the rest, but something about her definitely felt different. Her face was inked with dozens of small runic symbols that ran down her pale cheeks like streams of black tears. She didn't carry a weapon, but that didn't make her any less dangerous. Marcus knew better than to judge by looks alone, for he was well acquainted with another woman, one even smaller than Valise, and also never made use of weapons, who could end his life in the blink of an eye.
Flak,
The last rider said, but it might just as well have been a bark. He had a strange build that resembled a simian more than it did a human, with strong muscular arms that reached to his knees, a long torso that had a very conspicuous hump protruding from his back, and short, stubby legs that seemed no more than a mere afterthought. Even his scent was eerily unhuman. From his posture to his voice, there was something very animalistic, perhaps even alien, about the way Vlak presented himself. He wiggled his fingers next to his head to show Marcus his blade-like claws. He flashed a wide grin to put a mouth, filled with sharpened black teeth, on full display. Marcus let out a mild chuckle. If the gesture was meant to intimidate, then the attempt had failed miserably. He didn't fear a confrontation, no matter how strong the opposition might be. He did, however, acknowledge that spending 2 weeks in the Doran had severely drained his strength and stamina. If he could find a way to avoid a clash, that would be the most sensible path to travel. But the riders didn't take a detour just to lend him assistance out of sheer altruism. Of that, he was certain. No, this encounter would likely end in a bloodbath if he wasn't careful in his approach.
Marcus.
He finally said, not intending to give them any more than that.
Well then, Marcus,
Esau responded with a clap of his hands.
won't you come down from that hill so we can speak without needing to shout?
It remained silent for a moment as Marcus pretended to consider the request. Of course he had no intention of meeting them at eye level. Only a fool would willingly walk into a trap like that. However, he did have to get closer eventually if he hoped to free the Malarkey captives.
How will I know I won't end up like those poor bastards over there? What guarantees can you give me regarding my safety?
Esau raised an eyebrow.
Guarantees?
He laughed and uncorked a flask from his belt with his teeth.
There is only one guarantee in life, and surely you don't need me to tell you what that is.
He took a large sip of water, gargled it inside his mouth, and spat it back out onto the baking sand.
We don't have any quarrels with you, Marcus. You're the one who hailed us in the first place. And besides, we are friends now, are we not?
Marcus held his eyes on the darkened spot in the sand and watched with pain in his heart how the water disappeared into the air in mere seconds.
And what quarrel did you have with these 6 Malaks?
Esau leaned forward, lazily resting his elbows on his horse's head. He looked up at the dune with his faded grey eyes and grinned.
You have excellent sight, Marcus.
As do you, Esau.
The blind rider burst into a roaring laughter and contentedly stroked his beard.
These Malaki soldiers are our guests. We are merely guiding them to their new home.
And where would that be?
What's it to you?
Ilio asked sharply in Esau's stead. He didn't seem to appreciate the scrutiny in the slightest. Marcus turned his eyes to the freckled redhead and snorted when he caught a whiff of something that demanded his immediate attention. A scent that was released with a sudden spike of adrenaline. A scent that he, having learned through experience, associated with violence. He had to tread with care if he wished to reach a peaceful resolution. But, as was no secret to anyone who knew Marcus Bloodthorn, diplomacy was not in the blood that flowed through his veins. Words that passed through his lips were more often than not, intentionally or unintentionally, mere instruments of destruction. Like a true Bloodthorn, Marcus preferred to let his actions speak for themselves.
Your business is your business, I agree. But it just so happens that I have dealings with Malachi, and honor compels me to, at the very least, attempt a negotiation for their freedom. Now, what would it take for you to release them?
Ilio was about to tell Marcus that it would take a rusty gauntlet shoved up his rectum, but was refrained from doing so by a raised hand from Esau.
I'm afraid that leaves us in quite a conundrum,
The blind rider said.
Please believe me when I say that we have nothing personal against Malachi. But orders are orders, and we, too, are bound by honor to carry out our duty. I regret to say that the issue regarding our captives is non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable, is it? That is rather problematic.
Marcus cast a sardonic smile on the riders and started making some calculations within his mind. It remained quiet for a while, but the tension had become very palpable all of the sudden.
That look.
The pale-skinned woman called Ilandra murmured to herself. It sounded like a blissful moan at the end of a pleasurable ride. She squinted her eyes and gently chewed her lip.
You naughty, naughty boy.
We don't have time for this.
Ilio said.
Everybody is waiting for us to deliver the conduit.
His words were whispered, but to the ears of a Bloodthorn, they might as well have been shouted. Not that Marcus understood what any of it meant.
Let's just get this over with.
Evander, the bald-headed swordsman with the worn-out face, said with another yawn.
What's a delay of 2 or 3 minutes anyway?
Vlak, the rider who resembled more animal than man, concurred with an asthmatic cackling that sounded like a dog, dying in pain.
Ah, but you don't want to underestimate this one,
Ilandra said.
He is dangerous.
Evander snorted and spat on the ground.
Just because he tickles your fancy doesn't make him any more or less dangerous. I'm willing to bet he's all bark and no bite.
Vlak actually barked in agreement. Marcus heard every word of the conversation, but didn't really pay the frivolous chatter any mind. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the silver-haired girl named Valise, who wisely kept to herself throughout the entire encounter. For a second, he thought he saw the runic symbols on her face move. At first, he considered the possibility that it might have been his mind playing tricks on him. After all, spending 2 whole weeks confined to the harsh conditions of the Doran would be more than enough to make any sane person just a bit less sane. But then his face contorted into a grave frown. He wasn't mistaken in the slightest. Not only did the tattoos move, they were changing shapes as well. He could barely comprehend what he was seeing, but immediately felt a drop of ice-cold sweat glide down his back.
Looks like something has caught the attention of our princess,
Esau said, directing his words at Marcus.
That means our encounter has been cut short before we even had the chance to get acquainted with each other.
Ilandra put on a pouty face, but just as quickly shrugged it off again.
Shame,
She said.
I had hoped to keep him for myself. I always wanted to add a Garovi to my collection.
You still have plenty of toys.
Esau rolled his foggy eyes and turned back to Marcus with an apologetic smile.
I'm afraid this is goodbye then. Other matters have come up that require our immediate attention. Duty calls, and we have no choice but to answer it. Surely someone with your reputation will understand, Marcus Bloodthorn.
Marcus snickered. The carefree attitude of the riders annoyed him more than it gave him concern, and he was in fact very concerned, being physically and mentally depleted. A fight against all 6 of them might not end well for him, but he never showed anything less than what was to be expected from a bloodthorn.
The fact that you know who I am and not cower in fear is either a testament to your naivety or your confidence.
His senses were heightened by a surge of adrenaline, an automated response from his body that came with the preparation for a violent clash. And with it, he heard the thunderous poundings in the chests of 6 terrified horses, the faint heartbeats of 6 unconscious Malaki soldiers, although he was certain that one of them had been awake this whole time, and the rhythms of the 6 riders who showed no fear whatsoever.
Answer me truthfully. Did you know from the start who you were dealing with?
Esau smirked. The question barely had an effect on him, apart from a conservative twist to the corner of his lips. There wasn't the slightest alteration to his pulse or within the chemical composition that made up his scent.
Perhaps not when you started waving your cloak to get our attention,
He said coolly.
We simply answered your call because, well, we were curious to find out who would be desperate enough to hail a group of riders in the middle of the sand coffin. But when we saw your face...
He paused to let out a chuckle.
Pardon my colourful words, but let's just say it's very obvious that the fart did not fly too far from the butt.
And now that you know, where does that leave us, Esau? Your comrades seem to think they can waltz over me within 2 or 3 minutes. Do you intend to find out?
Esau scoffed and shrugged.
No, I don't think we will, although 2 or 3 minutes seems about right if you want an honest opinion on the matter. It's not that we underestimate you, Gorovi, but if I had a mirror to show you, I'm sure you would agree. Perhaps your pride might convince you of an extra minute or 2, but surely you won't see yourself victorious. No, you are not on our list just yet, Marcus Bloodthorn. Like I said, we have other matters to attend to, but it would be extremely rude of us to depart from this grateful encounter without leaving you a gift. After that, should we meet again, perhaps then we will find out.
He flicked his head to the side and was answered with a nod from Ilio. The red-haired boy, who might have passed off as a man in the eyes of some, raised a finger and started gathering his aura. Marcus felt his stomach churn with an unease he had never experienced before, a premonition of imminent disaster that loomed over him like a massive, all-consuming shadow. But he knew that he was wrong if he really made the effort to think about it. He had, in fact, experienced the very same unease before when he saw Cato's so-called dark companion for the very first time. That time, it resulted in the death of Preceptor Minari. He wasn't very eager to find out what misfortune this time the feeling would bring. The black on Ilio's fingernails melted and ran down to his wrists like ink. He dragged a finger from right to left, stretching his entire arm. Simultaneously, a black line was drawn in the air a few dozen yards in front of the riders. It looked surreal, like a tear in the very fabric of reality. He clasped his hands and the black line gradually cracked open with a ghastly croak, like the gaping mouth of a whale shark that was about to feed.
Farewell, Gorovi.
Out of nowhere, a white flash ejected from the black hole and shot straight toward the top of the dune at blinding speed.